She didn't just build a mansion, she planted it on ground that belonged to me. $4 million of glass, steel, and arrogance standing exactly where my house was supposed to rise. No one questioned it, no one blinked. The paperwork moved, quietly like it had something to hide. But when you've spent your life studying boundary lines, watching how cities grow and maps evolve, you start seeing what others ignore. What she covered up wasn't just property, it was a buried agreement, a legacy someone hoped would stay forgotten. But I dug it up, and what followed is a story you won't forget. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have walked away? She didn't just build near me, she built on me. The president of the Homeowners Association, we'll call her, Shirley, erected her luxury dream home smack in the middle of the lot I legally owned, and she thought she could get away with it. What she didn't know is that I've spent years teaching geography. I understand how to interpret aging maps and decode the language of land deeds. So I started flipping through old records, tracing faded lines. What I found chilled me to the bone. That lot wasn't just mine, it was designated for something much bigger, a public park meant for generations of children. My name's Connor, and this is how I brought her entire kingdom crashing down, by setting one trap that was completely legal. Drop your location in the comments, because trust me, this is the kind of story you'll want to share. I had just finalized the paperwork on what I thought was a quiet little patch of land in Meadowbrook Estates. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Surrounded by towering oaks, peaceful and private, I had already pictured the porch swing and evening breeze. After years stuck in tiny apartments with paper-thin walls and thumping baths until morning, this place felt like peace. Now that I look back, maybe the realtor was too enthusiastic. Hot market, she kept saying. Great long-term value. I should have known then, but at 35, I was tired of renting and ready to build a life. Then came the white Escalade, tires crunching, like it owned the road. Out stepped Cheryl. She looked like she'd been plucked straight from a luxury magazine. Polished hair, tailored suit, an aura that said power. Her purse alone probably cost more than my down payment. She didn't just introduce herself, she surveyed. Every inch of my property was mentally scanned, my surveyor's flags. The rough stack of lumber by the tree, even the chalk lines I'd marked for the deck. She didn't say it outright, but I felt it in her eyes. She didn't see a neighbor, she saw an intruder. Without being asked, she launched into a 20-minute lecture. Rules, restrictions, violations I hadn't even known existed. No dark trash cans, no porch flags, no unapproved fencing. It felt less like a welcome and more like a warning dressed up in a smile. That's when I realized I hadn't just bought land. I'd stepped into someone else's kingdom, and the Pommet Queen, she wasn't planning to share the throne. I froze when she said the paint on our houses must only be from an HOA-approved palette of beige shades, and that mailboxes must stand exactly 42 inches tall, no more, no less. Seriously, I blinked. In disbelief? Then she pointed at some trees on my lot, and casually mentioned needing HOA clearance for them to remain. I had to fake a smile, but inside, every new rule felt like a rope tightening around my chest. This wasn't about making the neighborhood look nice, it was about power. That much was obvious. Then, as if delivering scripture, she hauled a mud binder from her car and slapped it into my hands. Your HOA covenant handbook, she declared. The thing nearly dislocated my wrist. It was bloated with tabs and thick enough to double as a doorstop. I flipped through pages packed with restrictions on everything: grass height, fence types, and even what color beige was acceptable. It didn't feel like owning a home. It felt like signing up for boot camp with a paint swatch. While she rambled on about seasonal decoration violations, I noticed my elderly neighbor across the street tending to his flower beds. He waved, his hands dirt-covered but his face warm and genuine. Something about him felt real. Unlike the woman talking in front of me who smelled of expensive perfume and control issues. The contrast hit me hard. He looked like someone living in peace. She looked like someone enforcing a dictatorship. Eventually, she got back into her oversized SUV and drove off, leaving behind a cloud of luxury fragrance and silent intimidation. A few minutes later, my neighbor wandered over at that slow, relaxed pace only retired folks seemed to master. Nice to see someone under 40 around here, he chuckled, then added something strange. There was supposed to be a park right over. They're back in the 90s? Playground? Walking paths? The whole deal. His voice trailed off, hinting at disappointment. The way he said it sent chills up my spine. Not a warning exactly, but something wasn't right. He gave a casual shrug and headed back to his tomatoes. I stood there gripping the HOA manual like a brick, watching him garden with the kind of calm I'd hoped to find here myself. But now I couldn't stop wondering what happened to that park plan. And why did he feel the need to bring it up? Like a buried secret? Looking back, I should have asked questions right then. But at the time, I was still wrapping my head around the fact that someone had actually created regulations on garbage bin color. 3 weeks later, I'm sipping coffee when the mail carrier hands me a certified letter. The envelope practically screamed trouble in red bold font. Urgent notice, Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. I felt my stomach tighten before I even opened it. Inside, it accused me of unauthorized construction and warned of possible legal action if I didn't comply. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, thinking I missed something obvious. But I hadn't built a thing. How could I be violating anything? The notice claimed I was infringing on newly acquired HOA property and demanded I stop all activity. I stepped outside to see absolutely nothing new, just the same untouched patch of land I'd moved into. Digging deeper, I found out Sherlower power-hungry HOA enforcer had quietly purchased a slim strip of unused public land that just so happened to run along my property line. The documents looked legit stamped and notarized, but something about it felt shady. The timing was perfect for her, the price suspiciously low, and the land's description was vague. How did she even know it was available, and when did it become abandoned? That night, I laid out every document I had on my kitchen table: survey maps, HOA guidelines, the deed. That strip of land Cheryl snatched up lined up perfectly with where I was planning to start building. I hadn't lifted a shovel, yet I was being accused of illegal activity. That's when the real fear hit Tiff. Cheryl knew exactly what land to grab and when. What else did she know about my plans? And how long had she been watching me? I spent that weekend buried in records at the city planning office. It was as soul-draining as it sounds. Fluorescent lights, dusty files, and the lingering air of dreams long since crushed by paperwork. But I'm a teacher, and I know how to dig for answers. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Cheryl wasn't just enforcing rules, she was playing a game, and it was time for me to figure out the board before she made the next move. What I found nearly sent my pulse through the roof, and not in a good way. Turns out, Cheryl hadn't just picked up a random strip of land. Over the last 5 years, she's quietly snapped up 7 separate pieces of forgotten, neglected, or unwanted public land throughout our neighborhood. The kicker: each parcel was practically a giveaway, sold for next to nothing, and every one is conveniently located near high-value lots. It's like she's been playing chess while everyone else was napping. Once you map it out, the strategy becomes crystal clear. Still, most people wouldn't notice unless they were nosing around city records on their weekends like I was. I brought it up with a guy named Ben Carter at the planning department. Middle-aged, bored, and clearly overworked. Ben barely glanced up from his monitor. "Better someone uses the land than letting it rot," he muttered with a tired shrug, sounding like he'd given that same answer a dozen times before. But that word assisted me like a red flag. This wasn't about repurposing empty plots. It was orchestrated, intentional, and the way he said it, too casual, too rehearsed, like he wasn't surprised at all. When I asked for the original documents from the land sales, Ben suddenly became very interested in whatever was on his screen. His fingers danced nervously over the keyboard. "Might take a while to locate those," he said without looking at me. "Maybe weeks. Public records taking weeks to find, right?" I wanted to ask why digital records from the last few years were supposedly buried in storage, but his whole demeanor told me I wouldn't get a straight answer. I left the office with the sinking feeling that I'd just scratched the surface, and that the rest of the iceberg was lurking somewhere deeper. My next stop was the county library's archival room, which might as well be a graveyard for forgotten paperwork. After rummaging through a cabinet that probably hadn't been touched in decades, I pulled out a yellowing folder labeled Harmony Park, 1992. The librarian gave me the kind of look reserved for either brilliant researchers or harmless conspiracy nuts. Honestly, I wasn't sure which one I was becoming. Inside the file, blueprints, financials, and formal approval for a public park. It had been greenlit with a budget of over $2 million, complete with walking trails, benches, and play areas. But here's where things took a darker turn. When I laid the park's proposed map over a current property diagram, something didn't add up. My hands trembled. Lines had been redrawn quietly, deliberately. The old park layout stretched across not only Cheryl's mansion in progress but also over many of the empty parcels she'd scooped up. It was as if someone had carefully erased the park from history, one section at a time. I leaned over the map at the old metal desk, connecting lines like a detective chasing a ghost. It became clear, this wasn't just an oversight or administrative mistake. Someone had edited public records to make the park disappear, and no one had noticed. Not until now. My questions kept multiplying. Who signed off on changing public land boundaries? How did this all vanish from city records? Why was the only surviving copy of the plan collecting dust in a library archive no one ever visits? I copied everything: maps, minutes, and even a financial statement showing the park had been completed by 1994. It wasn't just approved, it had actually been built. Children played, their families visited it. Then somehow, piece by piece, it ceased to exist. This wasn't just about Cheryl playing HOA queen anymore. It was about something far more calculated and disturbing. On my way out, I had to walk past Cheryl's construction site. That's when it hit me. They were pouring cement for what looked like an in-ground pool right where the playground used to be. I stood frozen, watching concrete bury what was once a park, like grief turned into pavement. The crew didn't even glance at me, just another neighbor checking out the latest build, I guess. But I knew, they were covering up more than just dirt. That pool was being built over a ratio, over a dream that once belonged to an entire community. And the real question, the one that wouldn't let go of me, was this. If Cheryl could wipe a whole park off the books, what happens to people who dig too deep? And was I next in line? With copies of everything in hand, I decided it was time to stop quietly observing and start demanding answers. I wrote an official letter to the HOA board requesting a review of the discrepancies between the 1992 Harmony Park documents and current land plots. I attached every relevant page I'd uncovered, plans, maps, and budget records with the changed boundaries circled in red. If this was all just a clerical error, then it should be easy to explain, right? Mistakes happen, documents get missed. Boundaries can shift over decades of bureaucracy. But turning a multi-million-dollar park into someone's private estate, that takes more than a mix-up. The HOA office sits between a tax prep service and an insurance firm. Nothing flashy, just functional. I handed the letter to a receptionist who didn't even glance at it. Her indifference might have been real, or maybe she already knew who I was. In neighborhoods like this, news travels fast, especially when someone starts poking around things that weren't meant to be found. 2 mornings later, my phone rang. Cheryl's voice came through the line, syrupy and polite in the way a crocodile might smile. "Connor," she said sweetly, "let's not blow this out of proportion. Why don't you come by and we'll discuss it, just us?" The way she said it, like chatting privately, meant silencing trouble. Her tone wasn't comforting, it was chilling. I took a breath and replied, steady and calm, "If there's nothing to hide, then I'm sure you'll have no problem discussing it at next week's HOA meeting." The silence that followed was long enough to feel like a threat. Call. And in the silence that followed, I could almost hear the mental gears turning as she recalculated her next move. When she spoke again, the sweetness was gone. Her tone was sharp and cool, the voice of someone who's been playing high-stakes games far longer than you have. "That won't be necessary, Connor," she said curtly. "Some issues are better resolved through proper procedures." Proper procedures? That's a bold claim coming from someone who buried a public park beneath a luxury home. When I hung up, a cold realization set in. I'd stepped over a line that can't be uncrossed, and now Cheryl would make sure I understood exactly what happens when you refuse to play by her rules. But the worst part, if she has the power to erase an entire park from public memory, she's probably silenced others before. I was just the next problem on her list. In less than a week, the complaints started piling up. One notice said my lawn was too tall, though my grass was trimmed shorter than most of the neighbors. Another accused me of parking my truck illegally, though it was parked neatly in my own driveway. Then came the citation for improper garbage bin placement, even though I'd put it exactly where I always had. Somehow, sitting quietly on my porch became a neighborhood threat. I turned into my own forensic investigator, logging time, gathering photographs, tracking details like it was part of a criminal case. I documented everything: the anonymous complaints, the fabricated violations, and any neighbor brave enough to speak up. Slowly, the pattern became clear. Cheryl wasn't interested in confrontation. She was trying to wear me down. She wanted me to surrender just to escape the mental exhaustion. And the scary truth, her plan was starting to work. It all came to a head when a letter got taped to my front door. According to the note, my personal research was now a community safety hazard. That's when I knew I needed backup. I was in over my head against someone who clearly saw legal boundaries as mere suggestions. I reached out to Frank Miller, seasoned attorney, known for navigating difficult legal battles. A colleague had used him during a messy divorce and praised his ability to fight dirty without crossing any legal lines. Frank's office felt like a sanctuary of controlled chaos. Legal pads, old files, and that paper dust smell of real work getting done. I laid out every document I had: maps, sales records, notes, violations. He reviewed each one carefully, annotating in small, neat handwriting like he was preparing evidence for a federal case. Finally, he looked up. "Connor," he said quietly, "this goes beyond a property issue. If your claims about the park check out, this could constitute real fraud, the kind that topples entire organizations." Frank didn't mince words. He tapped a folder again and said, "This could go way deeper than zoning laws. Are you ready for what we might uncover?" Meanwhile, Cheryl wasn't letting up. She shifted tactics. The subtle rule violations became outright attacks on my character. Overnight, I went from concerned citizen to community pariah. Gossip spread like wildfire. People whispered about my finances, my mental health, and the fact that I was just a school teacher with a hero complex. The woman across the street who used to wave now clutched her child and hurried indoors. Even the mailman started avoiding eye contact. One evening, as I stared at my reflection in the window with Cheryl's construction looming behind me, I wondered which hurt more, Cheryl's lies, or the neighbors I once trusted who so quickly turned their backs. This was no longer just a land dispute. It was a psychological experiment in public betrayal. As the days dragged on, Cheryl's war became even more tactical. Flyers began appearing on car windshields throughout the neighborhood. They came unsigned, from concerned residents, warning about a mysterious newcomer causing unrest. No names were mentioned, but it was painfully obvious who they meant. I found one on my own windshield and felt a wave of disgust. Cheryl had stopped pretending. She was confident enough now to smear me in broad daylight. The brilliance of her campaign was in how she twisted facts. What began as a legitimate inquiry about public land had been reframed as a vendetta by a paranoid resident. I overheard someone at the grocery store say, "He's been pestering city officials over stuff from the 90s. Like looking into public records was a sign of mental instability. I wanted to correct her, tell her 1992 wasn't ancient history, but I knew logic had no place here. One of the few neighbors who still spoke to me came over with a look of quiet worry. He glanced around nervously before saying, "Connor, I like you, but maybe it's time to move on. People are starting to talk." He couldn't even meet my eyes. I knew he meant well. He just wanted peace. And for a moment, I considered. It may be selling and walking away would save me from this stress. Life would be easier in a neighborhood where your biggest concern was lawn care and not unearthing buried truths. But then I remembered the park proposal, the playground that never got built, the community space that was stolen. How many others had been driven away the same way? Giving up would make me one of them. And that's exactly what people like Cheryl count on. Then came Tuesday morning. I stepped outside to find all 4 tires on my truck flat. Not slashed, not punctured, just quietly, completely deflated. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a message. We can reach you, anytime, anywhere. Standing in my driveway, staring at my immobilized truck, while Cheryl's mansion grew taller in the background, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't scared anymore. I was both tired. I was being held in place, literally and figuratively, while her monument to corruption rose higher each day. I nearly broke. I even started calculating how much money I'd lose if I sold the land and left it all behind. It might be worth it for a fresh start. But then I thought of that forgotten park and all the families who never even knew they were cheated. And that was the moment I made my decision. I called Frank. The fight was officially on. My voice trembled not from fear alone, but from something sharper. Resolve. "Frank, they tampered with my car. This isn't just a warning shot anymore." He didn't even blink. "You want to report it to the cops?" His tone said he already knew my answer. "No," I said flatly. "I want to go for the jugular. No more warnings. It's time to make them bleed where it matters." I hung up and looked out across Cheryl's property. Cement trucks moved like insects, laying the foundation for a pool that should have never existed. It was stolen land, and I knew why I was about to step across a line with no return. But I couldn't tell if this was justice or vengeance anymore. All I knew was that I needed to finish what I started. That unfinished pool stood like a monument to everything wrong with this neighborhood. I didn't see luxury, I saw theft, bold and unpunished. Frank and I decided it was time to strike back. With everything we had, we filed a legal complaint accusing Cheryl of securing public land under false pretenses and called for a full-blown investigation into her so-called park project. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen. In plain sight, for the first time in forever, I felt like I wasn't cornered anymore. We had a plan. We had evidence. We had teeth. Frank dove headfirst into legal prep. He quoted precedent cases and drafted arguments with the enthusiasm of a man who believed the law still worked. I locked myself in my office, rehearsing my testimony in the mirror, rechecking every document, replaying every moment of Cheryl's fraud in my mind. We weren't coming in weak. We had timelines, signatures, historical records, everything short of a confession. I started to imagine the judge slamming down the gavel in our favor. I could practically see Cheryl's shocked expression when it all came crashing down. But confidence, as I would soon learn, is often just a mask worn by people who underestimate their enemies. That courtroom felt colder than any courtroom had a right to be. The walls, the floor, even the air felt heavy with quiet warnings. Don't expect justice here. I showed up early, clutching my evidence folder like it was the last life jacket on a sinking ship. Frank arrived in a tailored suit. Calm as ever, nodding at me like we had this in the bag. We were prepared, organized, righteous. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, apparently. Cheryl didn't just defend herself, she brought hell with her. Her team didn't walk in, they floated. Her attorney looked like he'd been pulled straight out of a political fundraiser and charged by the hour in blood. He didn't argue our evidence, he dismantled it, one smug sentence at a time. "This isn't justice," he said. "It's a neighbor, with a grudge, dressing up his paranoia in outdated paperwork." He made documents signed by government officials seem like useless relics, forgotten scraps with no place in a modern courtroom. Cheryl was recast as a civic hero, someone who beautified the community and elevated property values. Me, I was the angry neighbor who couldn't accept change, a bitter relic of the past who saw malice in every blueprint. Her lawyer painted a perfect picture, and the judge bought it like it was framed in gold. Our entire narrative got flipped, on its head. Suddenly, I wasn't a victim, I was a nuisance, and nothing we said could pull us back out of that hole. The judge didn't even take long to rule. His words sliced through everything we'd built. "Unless you can provide hard evidence of deliberate fraud," he said, "this is nothing more than a civil disagreement. Case dismissed." That was it. Months of work, gone in a blink. I felt like I'd been wiped off the map. Like all the hours I spent chasing justice had been deleted with a keystroke. As we exited the courthouse, I saw her, Cheryl, standing next to her Mercedes, lips curled in that same smug grin I'd seen too many times. She didn't have to gloat. Her expression did it for her. It wasn't just victory, it was domination. And her silence said it all. You were never a threat. Her attorney clapped her on the shoulder like an old friend. They laughed, they chatted, probably already plotting the next project, the next victim. And I stood there, numb and invisible. Like roadkill, no one bothered to scrape off the pavement. On the courthouse steps, someone I once nodded to during neighborhood walks passed by without a flicker of emotion. No anger, no recognition, just blank. That's what cut the deepest. Not the loss, not the humiliation. But realizing this whole ordeal probably didn't even register as a struggle for her. To her, I was just another inconvenience to be eliminated with wealth and influence. That evening, I sat alone, gazing out at her enormous half-finished house, its floodlights turning the framework into a shrine to stolen hopes. I felt like I'd crashed into rock bottom so hard it cracked beneath me. Maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe I should have never interfered. Maybe the park vanished because that's just how things work, and I was too foolish to accept it. All the evidence I once thought was so damning now looked like the scribbles of someone too deep in his own head, making sense where there was none. I was spiraling, wondering if I should just give up and move on, when Frank called. His voice buzzed with excitement, sharp and electric, and for the first time in days, something like hope flickered back to life. Connor, you better sit down, he said. You remember that Harmony Park project? I tracked down city records. The original council meeting minutes from 1992. He sounded like a man who just cracked open a safe filled with gold. He started reading aloud. Motion passed. Unanimous budget, $2.3 million. Construction begins spring 93. Completion fall 94. My heart kicked into overdrive. That cold buried ember of hope ignited again, warm and wild. Frank, are you saying I couldn't finish the thought? I was scared that if I said it, it would elvenish like the rest. They didn't just plan it, he said. They built the park, Connor. It existed. I nearly dropped the phone. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. This felt too surreal. Built, that meant the park was real, not just a forgotten plan. What happened to it? I asked, barely above a whisper. That's what we need to uncover. But if a completed, public park just disappeared from records? Frank paused. Then we're not just looking at a shady land grab anymore. This could be massive. After the call, I just sat there in the dark, staring at Cheryl's construction site like it was a black hole. The reality sank in. This wasn't just about stolen land. She had somehow made an entire finished park vanish without a trace. And what truly rattled me wasn't just her theft, it was her power. If Cheryl could make a multi-million city project disappear like it never happened, then she wasn't just another HOA president throwing her weight around. She was backed by something much bigger. And now I had just one shot to dig up the truth and bring the memory of that park back into the light. Frank sprang into action like a seasoned detective in a noir film, calling contacts, cashing in, favors, methodically chasing down clues. It was the first time in weeks that I believed justice might be possible, even if it meant crawling through shadows to get their .g past Richard's defenses. Eventually, the guilt won out over the fear. I helped build that park, Richard confessed, his voice so low we had to lean in to hear it. His eyes flicked toward the windows again, as though secrets might slip out on the breeze. It was beautiful. We had everything. Playgrounds, picnic areas, walking paths, even a little stage where local kids would do summer plays. And just like that, the fog started to clear. The way Richard lays it out makes me realize something powerful. This wasn't just some random patch of grass or a play area, was the soul of the neighborhood. It's where people made real memories, where kids grew up feeling like they belonged somewhere. For nearly a decade, that space brought people together: Sunday cookouts, birthdays, teens lounging after school. It was the heartbeat of Meadowbrook Estates, transforming a set of homes into a living, breathing community. As Richard talks, my hands start trembling too, not because this happened to me, but because it happened to all of us. Something precious was stolen. I glance up, and Richard's face tightens like he's been waiting years to say this out loud. I brace myself. I know whatever comes next is going to hit hard. Then he says, "It's," and the venom in his voice says more than the word itself ever could. That name alone tells me we're stepping into something much darker. He dives in, explaining how Cheryl, after snatching the HOA presidency in 2005, methodically dismantled that park. And it wasn't sloppy or impulsive, it was cold, calculated. The kind of slow-burning sabotage that requires a mind obsessed with control. First, she labeled the swing sets a hazard. Then she taped off walking trails, claiming they were unsafe. Eventually, she argued the picnic tables were attracting the wrong crowd. One memo at a time. She erased it all, dressing every act as concern for public safety. Richard's voice rises, and I can feel the frustration boiling beneath each word. He talks about how he stood by, helpless, as she dismantled what he and others had lovingly built. And she did it under the guise of responsibilities low enough To avoid suspicion, precise enough to silence doubt, every single step was made to look like proper community care. But she knew exactly what she was doing. The warnings were scripted, the removals scheduled, the narrative spun. And when neighbors raised concerns, she deflected with polished excuses. Insurance, liability, repairs. Always just enough to sound reasonable, unless you looked deeper. She was always ready with the data, Richard says, shaking his head. She'd show up to city meetings with reports, graphs, charts, all proving how much the park was draining resources. What she didn't mention was that most of those expenses came from fixes she herself delayed or fabricated. His fists clenched now, as if trying to hold back years of rage. By 2010, she convinced the city council the park had become a burden, a liability to public safety. She got it, declared abandoned. The city voted to archive the property for historical record. But something went wrong. Or maybe exactly right depending on whose side you're on. Then Richard leans closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. This part, I know, is what we've been chasing. The piece that makes it all undeniable. He tells me those park records. They never made it to the county archive. They were supposed to be preserved, but instead, they vanished. Not a single trace left behind. It's as if the park was erased from history. Then, from a dusty, time-stained box, he pulls out old photographs. My breath catches. Kids laughing on swings. Families enjoying cake beneath the big oak. Right there, right? On the land where Cheryl's luxury mansion now sits. I saved these, he says, voice shaking, because I knew one day, someone would need to see what she destroyed. I just didn't think it would take this long. The ink is faded, but the emotion cuts deep. I don't feel tired, I feel wide awake. Not because I've rested, but because I now see it all. This wasn't about removing trees or benches. It was the erasure of public joy, a burial of collective memory. Looking at those photos, knowing Cheryl turned that field of laughter into a private pool, it doesn't make me angry. Not anymore. It lights something stronger. I'm resolute. I finally get it. This isn't about rules or lines on a map. It's about someone stealing the heartbeat of a neighborhood. A person who saw happiness as a threat to her control. She didn't just replace a park, she replaced joy with silence. And assumed no one would remember what once stood there. So what do you do when you find out someone hasn't just taken land, but the soul of a community? Would you fight for the kids who never got to swing there? The families who don't even know what they lost? I stare at Richard, see the fear behind his eyes. Not just fear of Cheryl, but of her reach, her influence. She didn't just bulldoze a playground, she paved over shared memories. And now, I'm walking into the trap she designed for anyone who dared dig up her past. A blueprint meant to bury whistleblowers in silence. I can feel it in the air. The second court hearing, it's nothing like the first. The energy in the room crackles, like lightning before a storm, thick electric. Word about the destroyed park has spread like wildfire. And now, the courtroom is packed. Locals who never even knew what had been taken are showing up, parents, neighbors, faces full of shock and grief. People who've lived here for decades, finally understanding what went missing while no one was looking. And this time they're not just watching, they're remembering. Families used to gather in open parks, not just fenced-off backyards. Elders would reminisce about a time when Meadowbrook Estates was about people, not property lines. Cheryl showed up in her signature luxury ensemble tailored suit, picture-perfect makeup, and that trademark rehearsed smile. But behind the poise, I noticed her hands weren't steady. Her attorney looked uncomfortable too, likely realizing, too late, that he's representing someone who bulldozed a children's park to install a private swimming pool. No amount of legal training can cover up that kind of ethical rot. Dodd-Frank stepped up with calm precision, delivering our case like a conductor leading a flawless orchestra. Every point built toward a crescendo of long overdue accountability. The room was dead silent, all ears focused on his voice. He began with the 1992 city document spark plans. Approved budgets, signatures from local officials, proof that this wasn't a forgotten idea, but a real, implemented project. Then came the photos, kids and families filling the park with life through the late 90s and early 2000s. Not staged, not theoretical, just genuine moments now erased by Cheryl's mansion. He followed with damning recurrence maintenance, logs showing deliberate neglect, leading to staged closures. Each form bore Cheryl's signature, paired with flimsy justifications that crumbled when read aloud. Every document hit like a punch. I watched her confidence unravel with each new piece of truth. Her lawyer's glances turned from concern to panic, the realization that his client had duped him, and now his credibility might unravel in front of everyone watching. When Frank finally rested his case, the atmosphere felt like a funeral. Something had died, Cheryl's reputation, and the whole courtroom knew it. She sat frozen, trying to preserve the last scraps of dignity while her image disintegrated. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the children, laughing in those photos, playing where her luxury pool now sits. That flicker of pity vanished instantly. When Richard stood to testify, the silence deepened. Not even a shuffle from the back row. Even the court stenographer looked moved. His voice trembled with emotion as he recounted what he had seen. Some in the gallery wiped away tears as he spoke. One neighbor wept Willa calling, the swing set she used every weekend with her grandkids for years until Cheryl claimed it was a safety hazard. But we all knew the real reason. Richard described how birthday parties shrank into crowded patios, how laughter faded, how the community spirit vanished table by table. The swing set wasn't just wood and bolts, it was memory. And when it fell, so did the soul of the neighborhood. His voice cracked as he continued, and it struck me this case isn't about zoning laws or private property. It's about lost moments, stolen connections, and a deep betrayal that no legal verdict could undo. Cheryl kept pushing her narrative, revitalization, progress, modernizing, but the truth was brutal. The only thing constructed on that land was her sprawling mansion. The same ground that once echoed with kids' laughter now gleamed with polished tiles and filtered water. While families lost their sanctuary, she gained a backyard oasis that stood as a monument to her selfishness. Then came Frank's final blow, a side-by-side visual, so powerful it crushed any remaining defense. On the left, a bright 2009 photo of children swinging, smiling, mid-laugh. On the right, a recent shot of Cheryl's glittering pool in the same exact spot. Even the diving board gleamed like an insult. The contrast was unforgivable, and audible gasps echoed through the gallery. But Frank turned to Cheryl and delivered the line like a dagger. "Mrs. Cheryl, can you help this court understand how a public playground became your private swimming pool?" The question hung in the air, heavy as judgment. Everyone's eyes locked on her, the woman who stole joy to build vanity. Her suit still looked expensive, but her hands trembled. Her voice wavered, and for the first time, it was clear. Knew the paradise she built came at a cost the entire community paid. Frank delivered the final blow with precision. She didn't respond. Her mouth hung slightly open, mascara streaked like fallen armor. He leaned in, voice steady. "Mrs. Cheryl, these maintenance logs show the playground was barely 3 years old when you ordered its demolition." Her lips parted to object, but no words came. She tried again, failed, and finally slumped in silence. In that moment, she was no longer the arrogant authority figure, but a woman dismantled by her own documents. Unraveling under the cold courtroom, lights the judge's voice sliced through the silence. Decades of sharpened justice in her tone. This court finds extensive evidence of fraudulent land seizure and deliberate sabotage of community property. Cheryl was ordered to relinquish all illegally acquired assets and pay $2.3 million to restore the public park. Alongside additional penalties, her opulent $4 million home, officially condemned, set for demolition within a month. There was no applause, no celebration, just heavy silence, thicker than the verdict. This wasn't triumph, it was accountability. As the room emptied, Cheryl sat motionless, fixated on her manicured fingers as if they belonged to someone else. For a fleeting second, I felt a twinge of pity. Then the memory hit, the bare dirt where a swing set once stood. I thought about the lost summer laughter, the birthdays that never came, the games that vanished with the park, all sacrificed so one woman could extend her property line. Outside the courthouse, my elderly neighbor found me, tears catching the light in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "My grandkids used to live in that park. I thought it was gone forever." 6 months later, I stood where Cheryl's mansion once loomed. Now, sunlight danced off brand new playground equipment, vibrant and welcoming. The park was reborn, safer, brighter, and crowned by a small bronze plaque. "Harmony Park rebuilt 2024, for our children." A little girl raced past me, pigtails, bouncing, chased by her laughing mother. She ran straight through the former location of Cheryl's front steps. That moment held a quiet poetry, the sound of joy reclaiming a space once stolen. But this story was never just about playgrounds or property disputes. It was about principle, about knowing that not everything should be bought, bulldozed, or silenced. Community matters. So does childhood joy. Cheryl believed money could erase memories and erase opposition. But dreams aren't so icily buried. They echo, and sometimes, they wake up a whole town. As I watched the swings sway where a gate once stood, I felt something shift. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. I felt proud. Proud of the fight. Proud I didn't walk away. Proud that justice stood firm for once. Maybe what this proves is that truth always finds a way, especially when people refuse to back down. If you're still watching, I'd love to hear what stayed with you most. Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe. And if you want to support more stories like this, that little thanks button goes a long way. This is Timeless Walks. And believe it or not, the next tale? It's even more unbelievable. Catch you there.